we are very lucky to have with us Bill Stanley, and Bill's with Cornell Pace. I would say that you guys are definitely one of the bigger, other than the monstrosities of like 30, where some of these companies on affordable housing have too many, one would say. But you guys certainly are very, very well versed in it. So it's great to have you here today. And there's definitely people here, Bill, that really are unfamiliar with what affordable housing is. So just like by definition, can you just, in simple terms, what it means when we're talking about an affordable housing development?
So when you say affordable housing, I always think of it in two ways. And the way that you're talking about it is affordable housing with a capital A, capital H. It's some sort of building that has a regulatory agreement that dictates how you rent the apartments to certain income bands when you do your rent up and when you continue to manage it. There's small h affordable housing that's housing that's more affordable and at cheaper rents. But that's not what you're talking about, and what we're not talking about on this seminar.
Bill, how does a building, let's just say you have a building that's already built, regular rental building, built in the 1960s, and it's not an affordable building, it's just a regular rental building. Now you go and how does that building all of a sudden become affordable?
Well, you can file for an article. I believe it's an Article 11, and that's with the city. That will make that will bring a regulatory agreement in and dictate how you rent your vacant apartments, basically going forward. Now there's usually a requirement to rent through the homeless placement service for some of those units, if not all, or till you reach a minimum. But it's usually an agreement, and the trade-off there is you get a reduction in your real estate taxes. It used up until recently, if you had a regulatory agreement, even with an Article 11, you can get what's called the PHFL 610 rent increase, which allowed you to charge rents for subsidized housing more than the legal rents. But I think they stopped that process now.
Now, that's a really interesting nuance in the law, and there's a lot of owners out there that are trying to take advantage of it. Is it building wide when you get that 610 where you can charge a higher rent, or is it per apartment? How does it work?
Well, it's building wide, but the tenant has to have some sort of subsidy. That's Section 8 through the various agencies that oversee Section 8, which could be New York City Housing Authority, HPD, Housing Preservation and Development, or DHCR, which is at 25 Beaver Street, or it can be FEPS or city FEPS. And so the tenant share can never be more than the legal rent, but with the subsidy, it could be the amount of the collectible rent could be above the legal rent.
And there's really, unless you know something I don't know on this, which is very possible, there's not necessarily a rhyme or reason to it. It's just sort of like an exception to all the other rules, because generally speaking, you're limited on how much you can charge.
Yes, it was a relatively new law put into place a few years ago. It was put in place to help those affordable housing buildings that had low rents, statutory low rents, to make them more financially feasible. They were all having trouble with making their payments for their expenses, and it was a way to allow owners to have the funds to pay for the repairs.
How does a building that, let's just say, is privately owned now is it usually that it's private and now it becomes affordable by doing something with one of the city or state or federal agencies, or is it the reverse, that it's like city property and then They,
No, it could be privately owned. You're getting into an area that's not really my expertise here, but it could be privately owned. You make an agreement with the city to make it affordable, and they trade off real estate taxes to put it in the program. And what the city gets is more affordable housing, uh, and um, and the owner gets a reduction of real estate taxes. Generally, um, these buildings with Article 11s are in areas where the rents are not very high. So there's not much more to go to increase rents, but the trade-off is your expenses, which is your real estate taxes.
and I know there's so many different types of regulatory agreements these days. In my experience, the vast majority of them, even once the abatements or the agreements, the regulatory agreement expires, a lot of these units are still going to be regulated. Is that correct? Like they're not just gonna become free market once the
No,
regular.
they're in the rent stabilized units. What the city has done is they've extended their uh, life of the regulatory agreement to much longer. Before it was 15 years, now you see 30, 40 years. So the life of being affordable housing is much longer than it was in the past. They've come out of the regulatory agreement. A lot of times, you put them back in and get certain benefits, so you can make improvements to the building and continue for a reduction of taxes.
Because there's so many brokers on here, so I want to talk about a rental aspect of it, because you own buildings that are not affordable, but you also own and manage many other buildings that are. From the perspective of a rental application, are the processes the same whether or not it's an affordable housing development versus a straightforward rental building?
Yes and no. Um, the the no part is they're very strict on income guidelines when you rent up. So you have to make sure that you collect the necessary documents to prove that they're on a certain area median income level, and then you also a lot of the times you need to get it approved by by a city agency that they've reviewed the file, that it's approved, and that you're able to rent it. And if there's a homeless placement set aside, you need to get referrals from the city agency to get these residents that you can then approve. But it's very strict.
And is it all on waiting lists?
From the initial marketing, yes, it's on waiting lists, and then it's on the homeless placement services on their waiting lists.
One of the questions that often comes up is, so somebody comes in, they apply for this apartment and they qualify. Maybe it's a single person and maybe one child. Now, all of a sudden, a year goes by, 2 years goes by, and that same tenant, their household income is now, 4 times because somebody's in a relationship and the partner is making a lot more money. What happens with that tenant's right to keep renewing the lease in that apartment?
If you hit the jackpot in the lottery, you're still eligible. Once you're in the apartment, you're in the apartment. You have rights.
What happens, let's say, when you have tenants that maybe they're on a second floor and now the tenant is just maybe not even disabled, but just older and it's very difficult for them to get downstairs? How does that work in terms of if somebody's on a list for a unit, but they're not yet approved and in that development, who has first dibs to get that lower unit apartment if it becomes available?
So there's usually a waiting list. You get put on a waiting list for a lower apartment, and it's dictated on your marketing agreement, whether you're going to do a transfer or go for the next person in line.
what about subletting in these cases? Are the tenants allowed to sublet their apartments?
No, they're, they're, they have to be used as their primary occupancy. Whoever has qualified for the apartment and the income when they qualify have to be in the apartment. You can't just move people in without letting the owner know for compliance reasons.
Right. Now, I know we get these situations a lot. You have them a lot. All of my clients have these a lot, where even on the affordable units, it does happen where the tenant of record leaves, the tenant of record dies, and all of a sudden somebody else is living in there. I know from my perspective, and and it probably makes everyone crazy, I almost try and avoid not resolving the cases because resolving them ultimately is obviously cheaper and clients are always happier. But it's very difficult because you just can't get anywhere sometimes and you have no choice but to bring these cases. So what happens when, the kid or the cousin or the friend is left, or not, I don't want to say friend, somebody that would have been entitled to succeed, but they don't remotely qualify? What do we do then?
We got plenty of holdovers from us.
Yeah.
If if they're not in the household composition, they didn't qualify originally, then you really have to start a legal action. Otherwise, you won't be in compliance of your regulatory agreement. But if you have, let's say, the son, and he's on the household composition, and the mother passes away, and he's been in there the 2 years, he succeeds to the head of household, and he has his right to occupy the apartment if he was always in the apartment.
Does he have to go through the paperwork process, or he just goes in under her initial?
Well, he has to supply it. He has to supply a death certificate. He has to go through the process of getting him as the head of house, or her as the head of household.
Let's say an apartment becomes vacant, and I know a lot of these buildings, there's a certain amount of units that may have to get designated. Maybe it's for somebody that is blind, or maybe it's somebody that. So how does that work? Because here you are, you're managing a lot of units, something comes up. How does that work? Can you just go and re-rent it? How do you fill the spots?
So each unit is allocated based on the regulatory agreement. So you might have certain apartments that were rented 60% of AMI, certain apartments that are 80% of AMI, certain apartments that were homeless set aside, certain apartments that were mobility impaired. So when that resident vacates, you have to put in the similar population as that. So if I have a mobility impaired tenant, he or she moves out, I have to get a referral for another mobility impaired resident. I can't just go off the waiting list or rent it to anyone.
The affordable housing name of it really just puts such a negative connotation on it, because the reality is, is it fair to say that most, if not all, of these units or buildings that go through one of these programs is built, it may not be built new, but it's certainly going to at least be renovated before it's rented?
Most of them are built brand new. A lot of them have a lot of the amenities that any other type of building would have. They could have community rooms, they could have a gym, they could have
a pool.
Well, I haven't heard of anyone with a pool, but I'm sure there are. But
yeah,
what the brokers and agents who are on the call, a lot of these buildings, they do have a certain set aside, 10%, 15% of the units in any existing building, and rental building or sales building, that have to be affordable.
That's
so
right.
and they would have rights to use any of the common area spaces.
Right.
So they have to be, careful, how they rent these or how they sell them.
Speaking of that, when we talk about renting and selling, you guys are certainly familiar with protocol when somebody calls up and they they're going to rent an apartment. I know the brokerage community has certainly been hit hard over the last few years or even longer with respect to human rights cases where, people are trying to steer, brokers trying to steer people to certain buildings. And obviously in a property that's in affordable housing, we don't really get much of it because it's almost like silly. The whole idea here is providing housing. And it does seem that we have less from a portfolio standpoint in an affordable housing managed portfolio. From my perspective, it looks like we have less claims of discrimination in that than I do in buildings that are free market, let's say.
Well, as everyone knows, you can't discriminate based on source of income and how they pay their rent. And generally, the rents in these units are lower. So owners do want some sort of, subsidy. Subsidy helps pay their rent, especially if they're lower income. Whereas, they can get into trouble if they're steering somebody with a Section 8 voucher, a city VEPS, a FEPS voucher, away from certain buildings, which you're not allowed, as long as the rent is in the parameters of what this voucher pays.
Right. Yeah, you can't turn them down. Now, is it possible that somebody ends up in one of the units? Because what would happen, like in the example early on when we said, oh, well, you hit the lottery, you could hit the lottery and still live there. But how would that actually work? Because if everybody has some form of subsidy, if that person that's there doesn't qualify for a subsidy, would they then just be paying the full rent themselves?
They would pay the full rent themselves. They have a certain amount of income. If they qualify, it would be a self-paid rent.
Right. Which I guess is pretty rare in these buildings.
No, it's not. It's not rare.
Oh, wow.
They have 60% of AMI. The reason why they have it is the rents are reflective of their income. So if they pay 60% of AMI, their one bedroom unit might be $900 a month, let's say, for a one bedroom. So it's reflective of the rent. It's a lower rent. The 80% AMI might be in the same building, might be in the same floor. They'll pay more rent because that's the rent for that AMI.
The affordable units, are you still registering the rents with DHCR annually?
Yes.
And I guess in these situations where they have that 610, how does that get registered?
There's a spot in the rent registration. If the rent is different from the legal rent, you have to give a reason, and you put that in PHL 610. If they lose their subsidy, then you have to drop the rent back to the legal rent, or their whatever the rent they were charged beforehand. When I say legal rent, if you have a rent of $1,000 and there was a $200 preferential credit and they've lost their subsidy, you got to drop it back to $800. You can't raise it from $800 to $1,000.
Right. When there's the taxes that get reduced or abated on the buildings in exchange for participating in these various programs, I know when we're dealing with 421As, I know the process, how it's eventually the taxes are going to be phased in, so to speak. With the types of regulatory agreements that these buildings have, how does that work on the taxes? Is it the same sort of thing as any other 421A that eventually they're going to come back in so that when it's out of the program, they're paying taxes again?
I not my area of expertise, but I don't believe they get phased in like they would on a 421A.
Right. It's just not until it's expired.
It's more permanent.
Right.
or through the regulatory agreement.
Right. You know, sometimes I hear the expression, and I think a lot of people get confused by this, where they talk about floor area in terms of the amount of units or the type of units that are there. How does that come into play? Um, is it that they're designating a certain amount based upon the floor area? Is that why they reference it in the agreements?
Is that that's more 421A?
Oh, is it? It's not on the other regulatory agreements.
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Okay.
Um, you know, I guess 20% of your floor area has to be affordable housing, or to have the ability, let's say, to build more square footage or up, where it's not the case for before
Right.
fully affordable housing building.
What happens when, I know that some buildings, they may have signs for management. If you guys get a phone call and somebody is looking for an affordable housing unit, is there any scenario that you're allowed to rent to them directly from their call, or does everything have to go through the lottery?
They can get put on the waiting list, but in New York City, everything is done online. So you have a 100-unit building, you might have 50,000 applicants on it, because you go online and you look at the affordable housings and you check the buildings that you want, and you're on their waiting list.
You only get notified of the ones that you put down for. Is that right? Like you have to.
I would assume so, yeah.
Yeah. How long's the wait usually these days, or does it just totally depend?
Well, if you have a 100-unit building and it's 50,000 people on the waiting list, you can figure that out. It's
Right.
And what, maybe 5-10% turnover a year. So
Right.
basically, if you're low on down, you're never coming up.
Right.
But you're supposed to purge your waiting list each year, to see if people are still interested. And then you might be a year down the road and you've applied for one bedroom, and now you have a wife, you have a child, you might need a 2-bedroom. So you have to change that. What happens is your waiting list gets stale, and now they allow you to do remarketing to find people who are more interested.
Can you explain to everybody how do the rents get set? Since they're not necessarily following the guideline increases, are all the rents determined before the building's even built?
Yeah, all the rents are determined by the buildings before the buildings are being built, and lease renewals are based on rent guidelines.
Right. So it's still going up the same percent once it's already set up.
Once it's already set, yeah. And that's part of the reason for the PHFL is you have buildings that were built 5-10 years ago that had very low rents. Tenants are still there, you're still getting the same increases, and that rent isn't enough to support the expenses. So now if they have a subsidy, it enables to give a little boost in the income.
And I guess it's just the regulatory agreement that's going to determine whether or not the building will be permanently affordable versus a set period. Because do you have buildings? I know that there are buildings that are permanently affordable. They're probably the lower, I forgot what that's like, I imagine they're the low income housing.
There's usually a regulatory agreement that determines the length of the affordability. 30, 40, 50 years now we're seeing. So in 50 years, if I have a building, it's not going to be sort of my problem at that point.
Even though you can't kick somebody out if their financial situation changes, there is always a requirement that the tenants must recertify their income each year. Is that right? Or is it each lease?
There's a yearly certification process, and there's different kinds of certification processes. If it's 100% affordable, depending on your lead agency, you might have to do a self-certification. It's just, to certify your income. Because once you're in there, you're you're always in there. It might be a non-student affidavit. The one thing you can't have only students in the apartment. At one point before this, you'd be a student, and obviously you have no income, and you would be able to be in an affordable housing building. That was done away with a while ago. And then if you have like a mixed building where you have some level of affordability, you might have to do a full income certification to supply all your paperwork again of your income, your tax returns, your pay stubs, 6 months of saving statements, your checking account, and then if they see that like Zelle a lot of money in there, or one of those money services, you'll have to explain why money's coming in, why money's going out. It's a lot of work, but the trade-off is you get a lower rent apartment because you deserve it if you have lower income.
Right. What does it mean? I see a lot of these HDFCs that are not owned by the tenants, as opposed to because a lot of the brokers they handle HDFCs,
Right.
and there is a difference, but yet it's not uncommon, I guess, with the affordable housing buildings where they are HDFCs. They're co-ops, but yet they're not really converted. Is it that they're not?
Or it could be co-ops. We have rentals that are HDFCs that
Right.
are owned.
Right.
And it's just a tax way of doing things.
I haven't seen any of them though where they've turned over where they could actually be owned by the tenants. I imagine that could end up being a process when things change down the road as things start expiring. I don't know.
It happened in the 1990s when the city foreclosed on a lot of property.
Right. That's
and they
right.
gave them to the tenants association. Now you see that you sort of see it coming again now, where banks are foreclosing, and I'm sure the city will have more buildings, and they might turn them over to tenant associations or tenant groups. Usually, in the past, they've required, even if it's a tenant association, they've asked for a professional management company to manage it.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I imagine they don't really exist now, but there were all those companies out there that would be running these. I can't even remember the names of the organizations anymore, but they were different acronyms. Like, what was it? Like not TAP. I forgot what it was, but those buildings. The only ones I don't even think that they exist.
Yeah, Sobro. So was it Sobro? That owned. There were a number of different agent companies.
Yeah, I don't know that there'll definitely be another wave of them again at some point, though.
Yes.
We haven't seen that for a long time, and they actually there's been legislation out there, proposals out there to actually change a lot of the requirements for the HDFCs. The buildings that you manage that are the HDFCs are definitely, those aren't the problems. The problems actually seem to be coming in when you have the HDFCs that people do own, and because once somebody, just like in any affordable housing building, once somebody owns it, you can't say, hey, wait a second, you didn't really qualify, so you can't own it. And a lot of that, it's not regulated, so people end up buying and selling, and the requirements aren't necessarily being met.
Well, there's usually a strict requirement of your income, of how you can buy it.
Yep.
And then there's also how much you can make on a sale.
Right.
On it.
Yeah, most of them, right.
Otherwise,
Most of them do
defeat
have
the
high.
purpose if you have someone who could buy low and then have no restrictions to sell.
Right.
And it takes the unit out of affordability.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's still, you can't spend more than 30% of the household income on the rent expense. I think that's always been the number. So even though you're not told what you can what you could sell at, you can't sell any different, because no matter what, there's going to be a certain income that that person has to fall into.
There are also agencies that do these types of marketing
Right, right, right.
that take the paperwork, make sure the person qualifies, and then approves it.
Are most of your buildings also go through an outside agency to market them, or do you guys do that internally?
We do it internally. Not all companies do it. The bigger players that you're talking about that have a lot, they have both development side and the management side. We're a little unique in that we're third party managers. We might have a developer who doesn't have a management company, and it doesn't have a marketing arm. We'll do the marketing, and then we'll do the management. And the management is two pieces. One is taking care of the building and collecting and billing rents and making sure, and then the other part is making sure that the tenants are in compliance, doing your certifications.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's funny. It's definitely a niche, and it's not one that is easy. Because I see clients that all of a sudden they're managing an affordable housing building, and it's a process, and it's very hard to just step into it and do it correctly. So you guys certainly master that. When you do the recertifications each year, is that something that then has to go over and be submitted to the agency that you have the regulatory agreement with, whether it's HPD or
There's usually a report that needs to be filed.
Is it just more like making sure, like they're making sure that you're doing what you have to do?
Yes. Yeah. There's with affordable housing, there's a lot more hands in the management. You don't get benefits without having to jump through some hoops, for lack of a better term. You have a city agency overlooking it. You have the tax credit syndicator overlooking it. You have the owner developer overlooking it. You have their asset manager overlooking it. So you're doing a lot more of the reporting than you normally would for a non-affordable housing building.
Are buildings that are affordable allowed to be sold, transferred during the term of a regulatory agreement?
Yes, they can be. They can be.
And as long
they sell the general partner interest. Usually that's how they're structured. The general partner has a certain percent, a very low percent, and the limited partner, which is a tax credit investor, has a lot more. But you need approvals. You need approvals from the tax credit investor. You need approval from the agency that's overseeing it. It's not as straightforward that you can put it out to the market. You find a buyer, and you each have a lawyer, and you can sell it at an agreed upon price.
Before the, I want to say, almost like explosion of the affordable housing developments, I remember, like, you would have, not you, but in general, there would be a lot of, people had their vouchers, and they would just be all over the place. But one of the things that I found very common was that the rents were being suspended for repairs. Do you find that happens less frequently in your affordable units because so many of them are Section 8, or is that still a problem that you're facing?
First of all, you say so many. It's a certain percent. I don't know. It's 15, 20%. Whether it's affordable housing, capital H affordable housing, or small h affordable housing. And I don't think you can you can jump to the conclusion that if it's affordable housing and it's Section 8, you get more rent suspended than non capital H affordable housing that has it. It's really individually with the tenants and access and doing the repairs.
Right.
You need to get access. You need the tenant cooperation. It's the same on any type of building.
For some reason, I feel like I see less suspensions. I don't know, or is
affordable housing?
Yeah, I just don't see it. And maybe it's because they are mostly new. and
That could be part of it.
right,
That could be part of it. There's less that goes wrong. You don't have the plaster walls. You have the sheetrock walls. You
right,
have newer equipment. You have newer refrigerators, newer stoves.
right.
You have hardwired smoke detectors and carbon monoxide detectors that instead of batteries. And hopefully they're not pulling either one of those down. Um, there's less that the electric is new,
Right.
the plumbing is new, the sinks are
Right.
newer.
And as opposed to individual units, you're doing they're all being done a certain way. So it's not like where you used to where if somebody's just a voucher, it could just be that there's this random Section 8 tenants in different units. That owner isn't running the building in certain formulas and systems to make sure that they do avoid this. Whereas,
It's more that it's new construction and there's less that goes wrong
right,
because you're in a new building, and a Section 8 voucher, city FEPS, anybody with a voucher can be in any unit.
right,
It's the same thing in non-Section 8. You're not running a building for a voucher tenant any different from a
right,
non-voucher tenant.
right, right,
It's
right.
just the newness of the building that prevents helps uh, the quality of the housing stock.
What's your percentage of vacancies in the affordable units?
It would generally be no different from the non-affordable housing units, except that you need certain referrals to get this housing, and the agencies are delayed on giving. They're overwhelmed and they delay. So the vacancy is pretty much 0% besides the turnover and getting it ready. There's always somebody there, but it's just a matter of time. I can get in. I get a vacant apartment. I'll get it ready in 2 weeks, but it might take me two months to get a referral for a homeless placement service or a mobility impaired, and then it will take me another month to get the paperwork and qualify them, and then it might take and they come with subsidy. It might take 3 months for the subsidy process. So all of a sudden, it's 6 months. You have a vacant apartment. Whereas if it's a non-regulatory building, affordable housing building, you have you turn over the building in 2 weeks. You get the application. It might take you another week or two, and then they're in. So you might only lose a month's rent. That's really the big difference.
They don't give you retroactive.
No.
So, so if you, even though, like, let's just say you sign the lease and now,
You can't sign the lease until they're qualified, and um, if they're looking for an agency to pay the rent, either it's a Section 8 FEPS, city FEPS. It takes a while to process. They're not moving in until everything's processed.
right, right, right. So that,
That's the big delay. That's what I find. That
and you don't get that money back.
You don't get that money back.
Wow. That seems like a flaw in the system, especially when you're dealing with an affordable house. I mean, those rents are so crucial that it would seem that there shouldn't be, they should really do something about that. I thought that they
You would
retroactive.
think.
Yeah. When it was just a voucher, did they do that? Was it retroactive then or same process?
Some of the vouchers come with a month holding fee, but it's never just a month.
What do you think about the changes that are going on in New York? There's definitely now we have that whole other affordable housing development. I guess it's on the, what is it? What do they call that by Hudson? It's not Hudson, it's Hudson Yards, but the other side of it, I think. Um, Most of the development now that's going up they're doing it as affordable housing, most of it. Do you think that we're going to continue to see this more and more?
I think city and state officials are going to push more and more affordable housing. New York is very unaffordable, and
Oh
they're
yeah.
and they're really they're when you say New York is unaffordable, all the rents are high, but in Manhattan it's even higher than um, than the boroughs. You know, so it's pushing people out,
Yeah. Yeah.
and 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 they need more affordable housing. It just helps the housing stock, and it's very old. There's no incentives, really, to with the new act in 2019 to make investments in the buildings.
It's a tough cycle.
That's about as political as I'll get.
Exactly, exactly. All right. Well, thank you so much for this great information, Bill. It's always nice to have you on here. Big
Thank
help
you.
for everybody. And
All right.
all right. And I'll hopefully see you again soon.
Yes. See ya.